All right, everybody, welcome back to another Maui Athletics podcast with Dr. Allan and Coach Beth, where we cover all of your burning fitness and nutrition questions from the entire week. We've got another great episode planned for you today, another huge slew of questions that we're going to try to get to. I'm sure we are not going to get to everything, but we'll get to as much as we possibly can. For anybody that's in here live, feel free to ask questions whenever you feel like it. You can certainly use the chat to type those in. Just understand that you are on mute automatically when you enter the chat. All right. Does alcohol consumption really inhibit fat loss for 48 to 72 hours? Alcohol consumption has a wide range of effects. Inhibiting fat loss is kind of a weird way to put it. Your body tries to clear alcohol before it tends to utilize things such as carbs, fats, protein for energy. So in a way, yes. The biggest issues that you have is that this is a metabolic toxin that messes with protein absorption. It messes with hormones and their utilization. And so over time, particularly if you're doing this frequently or in excess, you're going to screw up your sex hormones. You're going to screw up some other hormones. You're going to screw up your ability to repair muscle tissue and build new muscle tissue. And so if we're talking about the wide-ranging effects on, lowering the ability to adapt to training to build muscle over time, it's a really, significant thing. And on top of the fact that even a couple drinks per day has potentially been seen to raise cancer risks. And so drinking alcohol is not one of those things that we try to fearmonger from everybody because the reality is that Beth and I occasionally have drinks as well. But it's also one of those things where, in the past, people have said, oh, a glass of alcohol per day is health promoting. It's certainly not. There's no evidence out there that actually looks at this outside of an associative data. And that's probably because people that can afford to have a glass of wine probably have more money and, higher education in general. And so they've got healthier lifestyles that kind of contribute to these associations, and it's not caused by the alcohol drinks themselves. So, does it inhibit fat loss? Secondarily, yes, it does, primarily through the fact that this is going to be taking advantage of your body clearing those things out specifically first, and then switching up to the food calories that you've taken in. All right. Is gum completely free on a deficit? I'm eating as much gum as I possibly can. So gum intake is an interesting thing because it certainly depends on what type of gum you're talking about, because there is gum that has calories. And so if what you're taking in has calories, it is certainly not free in a calorie deficit when you're trying to lose body fat, because that's going to potentially put you back in maintenance or maybe even a calorie surplus. Now, if you're using a calorie-free version of the gum, is it something that I would say go completely nuts on and don't even think twice about? I probably wouldn't, because as you chew gum, you are swallowing spit and air bubbles, and it can really bloat you over time. And so people will switch into these cuts, and then they will chew gum as their hey, this is what I'm going to be chewing for to hit that sweet spot. And they're like, I'm really bloated. It must be from the food that I'm eating. And it's because you're chewing tons and tons of gum, you're inhaling all this air, and it is causing you to feel bloated and have indigestion. And so, it's one of those things that as long as this is working in with your life, you don't feel like you have this indigestion, you don't feel like you're constantly expelling air and very gassy, you can have the sugar-free gums. To a decent extent during the day. The other thing that I would actually look out for too is if you're choosing gums that are based on sugar alcohols, they can be a laxative. And so, you might say, "Oh, I switched up my diet. Now all of a sudden, I'm having some real problems going to the bathroom constantly." Yeah, I mean, it could be your gum that's causing that. I mean, non-nutritive sweetener candies can do it. Sweetened beverages, if they're using things like xylitol, sorbitol, mannitol, all those different types of things can become laxatives if you're taking them in high enough dosages, and certainly cause some problems that you might be blaming on other things.
So to my knowledge, the sugar-free gum still has 5 calories per stick, I think.
I mean,
I
it
think.
could, it could, and that's something that you're going to have to check.
Yeah. The
Because it's going to
other
be
the
dependent on each one.
the other thing that I would like to point out here, and nobody likes it when I say this, because coming from the figure competition world, this was something that competitors did deep into their cuts when they were severely calorically restricted. So I'm wondering this if this person is eating like super low calories, that's not going to be sustainable. And this is technically it's an oral fixation, right? So we see this start to come into play. We saw a lot of oral fixation tendencies come into play in the Minnesota starvation experiment. This is on the sliding scale of disordered eating as well. So I wanna also throw that out there that if you are chewing a shitload of gum every day to sort of make up for the fact that you don't have adequate calories, you need to think long and hard about that.
Yeah, and I mean, contest prep type diets are rather extreme. And if you're a
Well,
person
that's why
that's not
I'm wondering where this question came from because
sure.
the only time that you would end up in this scenario where you're having to chew a lot of gum to like stave off hunger or like keep your mouth busy is if your calories are way extremely low.
Yeah, and if you're not in a contest prep situation, they probably shouldn't be that low.
Exactly.
And I think that's what you were getting at, and that's
That is what I was getting at.
yeah,
Yeah. Like
yeah.
this sort of raises red flags to me.
Sure. Because even if you're not a competitor, it could be a red flag of that, okay, either, and it might not even be that your calories are too low. It might be that your food choices are bad. And
Hmm.
so what I mean by that is you're not picking voluminous enough foods for the calorie
Yep.
allotment that you have. Your calorie allotment might be appropriate, but you might be trying to fit that in with like chicken thighs instead of a
Yeah.
leaner cut of meat, or you might be trying to fit that in with like pasta. Like I find a
Yeah.
lot of the times, even for many men, pasta doesn't really fit in a cut. And it doesn't fit not because you can't fit pasta. It doesn't fit because the amount of pasta that you can fit within those calorie allotments is just too low for satiety. And so I can tell you that based on experience of working with many, many, many people over the years, that women tend to not be able to fit pasta in on a daily basis in decent amounts unless you're also willing to say, hey, for like if you're going to do this for dinner, maybe breakfast and lunch are veggie-based meals.
Hmm.
And so that's the only way that you can fit this in. But if you're trying to spread your carbs out throughout the day, it very often does not fit.
Yep.
So you're going to have to make your shifts in where your calories go. And I mean, calories just become more priority as your total allotments go down. And so then you have to make smarter choices. So this could be an issue with the food choices that you're making, that you're trying to resort to this because you're basically feeling starved, even though the calorie allotments may be appropriate for you.
Yep.
All right. Seated leg curls. Should I lean forward a bit to increase stretch of the hamstrings, or should I sit back into the seat? I'm interested in your take on the pros and cons. So a lot of this stretched muscle length type thing has been coming out because there are certain studies. I don't know of one in seated leg curls. I just might be ignorant of it. I know of one in leg extensions. And when you're leaning back in the leg extension, we see a very slightly increased growth for that movement. I don't I don't really ascribe to telling somebody to like lean forward in a hamstring. I kind of want you to be in a position where you feel like you can get the most leverage. If you can create the most mechanical tension possible, then you are doing exactly what you need to do because mechanical tension, that fully working that musculature is worth far more than anything else. And so my point would be, where do you feel like you are able to work the muscle most completely? Go there. Even when we're talking about leg extensions and people say, well, there's that study that shows this. Cool. Where do you feel like you get the hardest target of that muscle? Go there. I don't care what a study says, because the differences in the study between, being pinned all the way back in a leg extension or being slightly leaned back, like which is optimal on paper, kind of goes out the window in real life when you are trying to establish proper mechanical tension. Because even in those studies, and I think there's a single study that shows that, and people have kind of run with it. Even in those studies, the question becomes, were these people really working towards the right, rep and reserve that they should have been working anyways for us to get a very clear picture that this is the right move. The differences between the two are going to be minuscule. So figure out where you get the best leverage and go from there. Anything to add to that, Beth?
I've actually never seen the recommendation to sit forward on a seated leg curl. That's
I haven't
that's a,
either.
that's a first for me. I've
I haven't
never heard
either.
of that in my life.
I would
I mean,
think
I
that
get
if,
it. I get it because if you're leaning forward once and your legs are fully extended, you're going to get a really deep stretch in the hamstring, but I'm not quite sure that that does anything like significant. So,
Yeah,
I've literally never heard of this before.
yeah, I'm kind of skeptical of that, and I haven't seen a study on this. But again, the what I'm trying to equate it to is one that it's similar and that
Yeah.
I have seen,
Yeah.
and even in that one, I think that it's a nice anecdote. And if anybody brings it up, they're not wrong in saying that. I just think that it's kind of missing the forest for the trees on that one.
Mhm.
If MRI and DEXA are the only accurate ways to determine percent body fat, actually, they're not. Autopsy is the best. Um, how do you decide when to recommend switching from a cut to a bulk, apart from how the client feels? Well, how the client feels is number one. But the number one thing that I would use to determine whether it's time to go from a cut to a bulk is, well, a couple things is their goals, because some people don't necessarily have the goal of being ultra lean. Like maybe they're a power lifter or a strong man, or they like the dad bod plus bulk look, which can be perfectly healthy, and that's fine. So if they feel that, we don't really need to go that deep. But the number one thing that I would determine outside of what the goal is I would be looking at visual assessment to figure out where a person is as far as their body composition is, their body fat levels are. And this is one of the things that I talk about a lot with people. What I really like is for men, if we're within 10 to 20% body fat, for women, if we're within about 20 to 30% body fat, um, you can go into a bulk or a build within that range and be perfectly healthy, and that's fine. And once we get to 20% for men or 30% for women, then we start to do some mini cuts to bring ourselves back down again, and maybe you know, 3, 4, 5%, and then build ourselves back up. And I would just use a visual demonstration. I would not pay for DEXA or an MRI to do this type
Nope.
of thing. I would use a visual assessment, because a visual assessment within those body fat ranges. So visual assessments are more difficult the higher body fat levels that you have. But within these body fat levels that we're talking about here, you can very accurately assess within a degree or two of where you are. If you look up examples online, and if anybody has any questions about that, you could post up in our Facebook group or in our Mighty Networks community, and I can get you direct visual examples to show you what this is what 13 to 15% looks like. This is what 15 to 17% looks like, and that kind of thing. You can just compare yourself. And I want you to take a picture in good lighting and compare it to that. I don't want you to be like staring in a mirror if it's possible, because I want you to be able to objectively sit down, look at the two side by side, and then make that assessment. But coaches who have been doing it long enough can kind of visually assess just based off of having seen hundreds of individuals and IDing that kind of thing. But I would do this assessment on when to shift. If goals aren't getting in the way, if emotion is not getting in the way, that tells us, hey, we need to get out of a cut or whatever it is. And we're just talking about getting into an optimal body fat percentage to build successfully. 10 to 20% for men, 20 to 30% for women. It varies dramatically. I mean, there's a reason that there's a 10-point spread in that, because different people genetically will sit at different spots. Some people are much leaner and sit lower. And so if I've got somebody that's a hard gainer that's having difficulty gaining, I mean, at 10%, we would start bulking easily. If I've got somebody that typically sits much higher and we've had to cut down in the beginning to get them into the 10 to 20% body fat range for men, um, I'm not going to bring that person down all the way to 10%. There's no reason to do that, because naturally they're not going to sit that low, most likely. And so maybe we get down to 15, 16, 17%, and then we consider doing it. If at that point they're like, you know what, my main focus is building muscle and I want to do that, then I say, okay, cool. Well, let's get down to like 15, 16, 17% and then switch once we're there. Because the reality is that when you're significantly higher than that, when you're above 20% for a man, when you're above 30% for a woman, you can still probably lose body fat while gaining some muscle at the same time. So we may as well be improving your health. We may as well be improving your confidence. We may as well be improving, your performance in things outside of just maximal lifting, unless you have a reason to specifically focus on that. And so if we've got reasons to specifically focus on that, maybe these recommendations change a little bit. But for the average person, that's the answer based off of visual assessment. Okay. Must you have a variety of movements when weight training to see results? Does it or does it not matter? So you need a small variety. If we want to maximize hypertrophy, you need a small variety, because we need to hit the muscle from a variety of different angles, different lines of pull. But it's far less than most people think. I mean, you probably need two, three, four movements max And this is just not in one training session. This is like forever. You probably need two, three, four movements in each genre max to pretty much maximize everything. And what I mean by genre is like a vertical pull, a vertical push, a horizontal pull, a horizontal push, flexion and extension of the spine, of the arms, of the legs. You probably don't need that many movements. I mean, like a hack squat, a leg press, a deadlift, an RDL, you probably just covered your legs entirely.
Done.
Yeah, you
Yep.
don't need anything else
Legs
for
are
the rest of your
done.
life. You don't need anything
Yep.
else. Um,
Great.
and maybe if we're talking about longevity, I mean, I was keeping it really simple there with like compound movements, but if we're talking longevity and giving ourselves the ability to hit musculature and spare our joints a little bit, maybe you replace if I said leg press and hack squat, maybe you replace that hack squat or that leg press with like a leg extension, and then you've got hack squat and leg extension. You could literally do all of your front side of your legs with
Yeah.
those two movements for the rest of your life, and you would
Hmm.
not notice any discrepancy.
Hmm.
Now, there's certainly reasons to be doing some other things, and I don't want to downplay like the benefits of like the unilateral movement for maybe
Functions
stability
and stuff.
or stuff
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, but it again, remember when I said like two, three, four
Right.
movements? Well, there we go. We've
Right.
now all of a sudden thrown in like the unilateral movement to be able to hammer that out. And so what if we say like arms and flexion? I mean, a standard barbell curl and then a hammer curl. Arms are done
Yep.
forever. Like that's it. That's all you need. The arm doesn't do a whole lot of stuff. I mean, the bicep doesn't do a whole lot of stuff. It literally moves that one joint in that one direction. So all you have to do to change it, when I'm talking about a little bit of variability in what we're doing to be able to hit the muscle completely and to be able to hit the action of that movement at the elbow completely, the difference there is switching where your hand is. And so this does every movement that does this is pretty much the same thing. Like all curl variations. And I don't care about those guys who want to be like laying virtually flat on a bench. That's literally people just trying to make up a movement so they can put their name on it or say that they invented it. Does not matter. Arnold has some of the best biceps in the world and basically built them off of just barbell curls. And so, we're really overcomplicating these things in this weird effort to like throw maximum variability into these plays when two, three, four, I mean, two might be a little bit low, but you know, three, four, you easily have your entire life taken care of, done.
Yeah.
And so then everything else that comes into that play is okay, well, maybe I need to switch up my rep ranges. Maybe I need to put it at a different time in a workout routine. Maybe I shouldn't just do barbell bench press as my first movement every chest day. You can still use barbell bench press, but maybe you change up the set and rep scheme. You put it in the middle of the movements and do something else in the beginning. Maybe you do, you can prioritize these things in different ways. You don't need different exercises. And you certainly don't need those Instagram like exercises that look like somebody's, upside down hanging from a rig. Like it's getting ridiculous. And it's getting ridiculous because people want to look unique. But it's certainly not necessary. So a few different movements that target the musculature from different planes. And what I mean by that is if we're going to say chest, maybe a barbell flat bench press is perfectly fine, plus a dumbbell incline bench press to hit it from a different plane, plus a fly. There you go. Chest is completely done. That's all you need forever. And so people really kind of overcomplicate these things. And it's funny, like my programming for myself, I'm following the 4-day programming in the Iron Core training. Um, when it's my programming for myself, I'm a little bit less varied in my movements. And it's not that the variety of movements can hurt. If you're doing progressive overload, and you have them in play and you're choosing the right movements, there's a bunch of different exercises that work. So when I say two, three, four exercises, choose the ones that are you're motivated to do the most, that cover what you need to cover. We cover a lot of different ones in the Iron Core training when Beth and I are programming, and we do that because the variety is fun. Is it necessary from a hypertrophy standpoint? No, it's not. Will it maximize results? Yes, it will, because of the fact that like when we're choosing and we're choosing, okay, well, this is a horizontal push, we need one here. This is a horizontal pull, we need one here. And so all of those things are being considered when we're programming. But when I'm programming for myself, I know what I like from a movement perspective, and I don't need to give myself that same level of variety that a lot of people feel like they need. And so my training is 100% similar from when we look at the Iron Core training. this has a horizontal pull here. This is a horizontal push here. This has this here. This is this here. I do that exact same thing, but I just have less variety when I'm just programming for myself than what we would program for other people because I realize that other people get bored. They're like a lot less neurotic than I am, and other people get a lot more bored. Doing the same kind of movements and seeing something new is motivating and fun. But I'm just kind of motivated from being able to get into the gym itself. And so there's a difference when you program for somebody like that versus when you program for the majority of people. Any thoughts on that one, Beth?
No, I think you covered it really well.
How many days per week do you eat red meat? Um, my husband is healthy. He is 40 years old and he worries about the fact that I eat red meat multiple times per week. This is actually funny because you don't really see this in this direction. Usually it's the wife being worried
The
about the
other
husband.
direction.
Yeah, usually it's the wife being worried about the husband eating the red meat all the time. Okay, so when you talk to nutritionists and they bring up the fact that eating more red meat has been shown to have higher risks of CVD and cancer and those different types of things, they're 100% right. The research typically does not. First off, most of it's associative data because it's really hard to run long-term studies on this type of thing. And so what they'll do is they'll send you a questionnaire and they'll say, "Hey, how many times a day, how many times a week do you eat red meat?" And then they'll check back and they'll see if you got cancer or you had a heart attack or something like that. And so there's always confounding factors in play. They try to control these as best as they possibly can. Lifestyle, does the person smoke? Does the person work out? Does the person blah blah blah? And people that eat red meat typically tend to be the least healthy people. That's just the way that it is. They eat the least amount of fruits and veggies. They exercise the least. They have all these other issues. And so that's, for the people here that are like big, I eat a lot of meat. I'm big on that and I work out. That's perfectly fine. Listen to the second part of what I'm going to say. So I don't vilify red meat. I think that it is perfectly fine, assuming it's lean red meat. It's not putting you into a massive calorie surplus and you're eating fruits and veggies. If you're doing that, the negative health effects seem to be mitigated.
You might want to define lean red meat though.
Well, lean red meat being lower levels of saturated fat compared to some of the standards that we eat. I mean, if we're going to be choosing steaks, pick flank or top sirloin. If we're going to be choosing ground beef, you're going to want to pick like a 93% ground beef or potentially higher for the majority of people.
Bingo.
And if we're doing that in conjunction with eating fruits and veggies at these meals, any sort of risk increase that we see is either nothing or super minor. Like it's so minor that the fact that you're eating whole minimally processed foods, you're eating at home, you're controlling what you eat is going to counteract any of the negative effects that you would see in a practical sense in real life. Um, and so there's a lot of hesitancy by nutrition professionals to say you can eat as much red meat as you want because people tend to not do that responsibly. And then they tend to eat the red meat. They listen to that part, but they don't listen to the eat fruits and veggies with that meal part because fruits and veggies, um, and assuming that this meat is not highly cured and cooked at too high of a temperature, because charring, smoking meats is problematic. Heavily curing meats is problematic from a cancer perspective. But even in those cases, when you're having those, occasionally having fruits and veggies with the meal is probably a really good thing because vitamin C and some of the other constituents of fruits and veggies helps to prevent nitrosamine formation in the gut, which is what causes some of this cancer. And so this is a funny thing where we talk to the carnivore and the vegan crowds, and it's like a combo of the two is always the best. And so this is one of the reasons that carnivores need fruits and veggies. I know that they want to pretend like they get everything that they can or everything that they need from meat, but they don't. You don't get some of these benefits. You don't get the benefits of phytonutrients. You don't get the benefits of fiber. You don't get the cancer prevention benefits. And that's one of the biggest ones. And they're like, well, I'm really healthy. And it's like, you've been doing this for a year. Like come back in 20
Let's see
when
when you're 20 years from now, 30 years from now.
yeah. And so that becomes really problematic long term, potentially, depending on your genetics. And so we don't know what your genetics are going to display. So why would we say, oh, well, I'm super resistant to cancer? You don't know that. So eat your fruits and veggies on top of the fact that it's good for your digestive health. It's good for so many other things. Um, and yeah, I mean, we just shouldn't be testing this.
I love that they say that they get their micronutrients because the cow ate grass.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
It's such a stretch.
Yeah,
Like
I mean
my
that's
God. Oh my God.
That's one of the weirdest things. It definitely does not work like
So
that. Are there any legal supplements, I like that legal was mentioned here, worth taking other than creatine, protein, pre-workout, and a multivitamin? I mean, even a multivitamin is really questionable about whether or not it's worth taking. I recommend it, and I recommend it to our clients and everything because it's a good nutritional insurance, and if it's formulated in not a stupid manner, it's not going to harm you in any way. So particularly in a cut, it could be a really important thing. Not really important. It could be a beneficial thing. We just don't know, and it's going to be get better and better information over time. But currently, we're not entirely sure about that. Are there things beyond those that are worth taking? I would certainly say I would 100% push you towards a fish oil, a properly dosed fish oil, 2 to 5 grams of EPA plus DHA daily. That is different than total omega-3. I would push people towards a magnesium supplement, potentially vitamin D if you do not get out in the sun very much. Um, and then the rest of the stuff that I would recommend taking are it's kind of situation dependent. You know, if a person wants some cardiovascular benefits, there are certainly supplements out there that are intriguing from a cardiovascular health perspective. Citrus bergamot, like a highly bioavailable curcumin supplement, maybe aged garlic.
garlic.
Um, yeah, I mean, there are joint supplements that could potentially help, particularly in osteoarthritis cases, pycnogenol and boswellia being two of them. I mean, there are some performance supplements that I find intriguing and have some decent or really good data behind them. Taurine, betaine, citrulline malate, beta-alanine, depending on the type of movements that you do. So there's a bunch of different supplements that could be beneficial. But for us, as a general rule, I recommend creatine, protein if you need it, pre-workout if you want it, fish oil for sure, because nobody here is eating fatty fish meals 2 to 3 times per week, and probably magnesium are the ones that I would look into. All right. How do you breathe and brace during exercises? Let's give squat as an example. Um, I like to tell people think of yourself as you've got a barbell back squat, you've got the bar on your back, you're standing in water up to your chest, a pool of water up to your chest. How will you breathe in that situation? You'll take a big breath at the top. You will puff out your chest. You will stabilize your spine. You'll drop down. You're going to have to hold your breath while you're underwater. Then you're going to press back up out of the hole and you're going to start to breathe once you're towards the top or at the very top of the movement. So that's how you breathe and brace. The other thing to think about when you're doing this, when you take in that big breath up top to fill your chest, let it stand up, contract your stomach as if you were getting ready to take a punch to your belly button. It's the best way to explain how to do this, I think. And envisioning the thing where it's like, okay, well, I've got a pool of water that I'm standing in and it's right up to my chest. I got to take this big breath because while I'm down under the water, I have to be holding my breath. And you want to do that because creating that intra-abdominal pressure is going to be necessary to prevent your spine from collapsing in the bottom of the squat or whatever it is. So thinking about it in this manner can really help because it can give you a visual of what's actually going on there. But those two things, pretend that you're standing in water, think about taking a punch to the gut right at the belly button. You essentially pull your belly button in tight to your spine. Okay. Who is Deborah from the cul-de-sac? She is she is our biggest enemy. We don't listen to her. She does keto and carnivore and veganism all at the same time. Um, what do you think about counting macros? Some coaches agree, some don't. The question is, what are we thinking about here when we're
Oh
talking about
man,
this?
I could talk about this for 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big one. Is counting macros beneficial? Yes, it can be. It can be a great learning tool. Um, we don't tend to push this towards our clients. We tend to do a flexible meal plan whenever we build them. This still follows macros, but we do the macros on the back end. The people don't do the macros on the front end. We can certainly do macros with people. The reason that we don't push it as a standard is because people will typically make wrong choices quite a bit because they're just fitting their macros and they're not thinking about health. And macros tell you how you gain or lose weight. They don't tell you what you gain, what you lose, or overall health. And so it's not a way to learn about health. It's a way to learn about what the foods that you eat contain and how they affect your weight loss or weight gain. And I think that people really confuse that. On top of that, when we're working with macros, people will people will get decision fatigue over time. I mean, they love doing it for like 2 or 3 months, and then they burn out because they're like, I'm tired of doing math by the end of the day. And so I think it can be a great learning tool. I am not of the group that thinks that this is going to cause some kind of eating disorder, because unless you have an eating disorder, have had an eating disorder, are prone to eating disorders, that's not going to cause that. And I can think of a study that they did in college-aged women, and they had 200 or 300 college-aged women that they put on macros protocol specifically to see if it caused disordered eating tendencies, and it didn't in any of them. And so if it's not causing any college-aged women, probably, like high school and college-aged women are probably, I have no data to back this,
Most
but
prone to
I
it.
would
Yeah.
assume that they're the
Yeah.
most prone,
Yeah. They are.
because that's the age group where boys are brutal, and people haven't established like their own sense of just, I can say no and fuck these other people's opinions. Like high school and college are really bad for that type of thing. And so I would think that this would be, if we're going to see disordered eating tendencies, this would be the group, and we didn't see it.
Do you know how
So
long the duration of that study was?
I think it was like 8 or 12 weeks.
So that, I mean, that's kind of the other thing is usually those things don't rear their head until you've been doing it for a while. So
I can pull it up, but they weren't they were monitoring the choices that they were making too, and it wasn't like that they were becoming orthorexic or anything like that. So it wasn't like they were like, oh, well, I have to choose only like clean foods to make this. Like
right.
none of that was even being shown. So I can look that up later to see the exact time frame, but I remember seeing it and saying, okay, well, this is that group that you would think that we see it in. And I've seen a bunch of studies looking at this type of thing, and not a single one has suggested that it causes disordered eating outside of people that already have pre-existing eating disorders.
The only thing I would like to say about that is not that it causes disordered eating, but what I have seen it cause is people who've been doing it for a very long time. So they don't have disordered eating patterns or behaviors in the sense of like orthorexia or binge, like it's not stopping them from binge eating type of thing. What I have seen is people that have been following macros for so long, like years, that they don't know how to feed themselves once you remove the app from them.
Sure.
So like I have had a few clients who have been macro trackers for pretty much a decade at this point. And we wanted to start to wean them off of it because I personally don't think it's a sustainable practice to do that for the rest of your life. I think it is a good tool and a good exercise to use to understand the nutrient composite and the calorie composition of the foods that you eat on a routine basis. So for people that have been using it for 10, 15 years, like why do you feel like you have to do it? Like are you incapable of controlling the quantity? You know what you should eat at this point, right? Because you know what is going to fit your calories, what is going to fit your goals, your body composition. You should know that after a few years of tracking macros, right? So why do you need to track literally indefinitely? And in trying to wean people off of their over reliance on an app to tell them how much they've eaten over the course of the day. When you remove that, these people have zero ability to understand how much food and how many calories they have eaten over the course of the day. And I think that is problematic.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be, that's a slightly different subject. I mean that's kind of um, identifying coping mechanisms and um,
It's not just
strategies
what
to.
you're eating, but it's affected eating behavioral patterns.
Sure.
So it's and I think that is I do think that's an important distinction to make because I think as macros has gained popularity, um, it's sort of, in my opinion, jumped the shark a little bit from what it was intended to do. I mean, you and I were around the bodybuilding.com forums when IIFYM, we were there when Alan
When it
Aragon
started, yeah.
created that acronym. He had bodybuilders coming into the forum asking, instead of oatmeal for breakfast this morning, can I have a piece of toast? And Alan would say, yeah, if it fits your macros. Or can I have sweet potatoes instead of white potatoes for dinner tonight? Yeah, if it fits your macros. And so that's actually how IIFYM or macros came to be. It was a means for a bodybuilder in competition prep to sub one healthy, nutrient dense food for another. It was not intended to switch my brown rice for a friggin' Pop Tart. And that's what it has sort of turned into over the course of decades. And so this is why I could talk about this forever, because I think we have really gone well beyond the intended purpose of what this tool was supposed to be used for. And now we are completely dependent upon it to make good food choices and to keep our total daily calories in check for the day. We've lost all ability to actually understand our own hunger and fullness cues. Like I don't love macros. I'm going to be very honest. I don't love them. I think they're a good training tool for a lot of people who don't know the calories that are in a lot of the foods that they eat on a regular basis, like coffee creamer is a great example of that. Condiments, but I think it's jumped the shark a bit.
So how do you recommend people wean off of it?
That takes a very long time. So typically what I have people do is if they're tracking every single meal, we start to back off the number of meals. So I usually have them pick a meal that they're very comfortable and confident with, that they always eat that same thing at the same time of day every day. They've seen it on their plate for the last 10 years. They know exactly what it's supposed to look like. Start there. I don't want you weighing anything on a food scale. I don't want you typing anything into MyFitnessPal. And let's do that for a few weeks until that panic and that anxiety go away. And then let's try another meal. And then when we get to the point where we're not tracking any meals at all whatsoever, let's try some substitutions. So if you normally have chicken breast for dinner, let's try chicken thighs. Let's try a fattier cut that is higher calorie and see if you are able to reduce the volume on your own adequately. And we use what is happening on the scale to tell us if we're on the right path. Because if somebody starts to gain weight, that means that they're eating too much of that, right? So then we can fall back and start to weigh and see what a good true portion actually looks like, and then remove that once we have that ability in place.
So
But
this,
it takes a long time.
yeah, no, I'm glad that you said this because I actually I wanted to kind of guide the conversation in this direction because it brings up another good point. When I work with people that do macros, one of the big things that I always get pushback on is they're like, well, I want the macros because I want variability. That could be hamstringing yourself in the beginning. What I tell people to do, even in the very beginning, is I always say, hey, I want you to plan a day ahead of time. Like I want you to plan on an entire day, even before you get started onto this whole journey of using macros, right? I want you to plan an entire day to fit the macros that we have set up. I want you to have two or three options of meals for, like, say, lunch and dinner
Mhm.
that are interchangeable. People get super pissed off when you do this. And they're like, well, why? And you're like, well, because we want to teach you how to build the meals that should be sustaining you. And they're like, well, then that feels like a meal plan. And it's like, yeah, but
The
here's
most
the
successful people on who track macros eat the same thing
eat the same
every
thing. There,
day.
there are
Every
very, very
day.
few, if anybody, that varies literally every meal that they have
No,
and is successful. You cannot keep up with constantly
no.
cooking. You cannot
Mm.
keep up with the constant hunger signaling because here's the issue. When we look at people that have lost weight and kept it off long term, they have three things that tend to be in common. They cook their own food. They have low variability in the foods that they eat daily. This is immutable. They have low variability in the foods that they eat daily. This is where the people that are like, well, I'm just going to do macros because then I can eat whatever I want and it'll all work out. No, because there's a thing called the buffet effect. The buffet effect, when you have ever-ranging choices that are always out there, this is why you have that self-identification of, oh, well, I just have a sweet tooth, or oh, I just have this. It's because you're constantly varying these things up. It's creating this huge craving. You're constantly giving into it because you're fitting it within your macros. Can you fit in small amounts of these things daily? Yes, you can. And so if we're saying we're going to lower variability, you can have some chocolate every day. No one's saying you can't. What we're saying is constantly having a massively wide-ranging amount of different foods without some staples is setting yourself up for failure long term. It's going to be very, very problematic and very, very hard to do that. Your hunger signal is going to go crazy. You're going to have those days where your willpower is just not as strong and you're going to give in. And then you're going to be like, I don't understand why everybody else can do this and I can't. It's because everybody else is sticking to a 2, 3, 4 meal rotation and they're sticking to it. They will have off-plan meals, but that's once or twice a week. That's
Yeah,
it.
you shouldn't need to like account for that in MyFitnessPal.
No, I mean you moderate based off of you've constructed your own meals. You're learning what the meal sizes look like, how the composition is. If you've constructed 2 or 3 different meals for dinner, for lunch, hey, my dinners are roughly 500, 600 calories.
Yep.
And
And
now
if
I
you
can
go
kind of
over one night, like that's okay. Like you
yeah.
can go over your macros for a night. Like you don't need to record an 800 calorie restaurant dinner in MyFitnessPal, like if it's going to cause you anxiety. Like just be over your calories for the day. Like it's
And
fine.
also understand that a restaurant meal, if they say that they're 500 calories, it could be 1,200 calories.
Yeah.
So when they've looked at studies with restaurant meals, or meals at like Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, they're not weighing your burger patty. They're not weighing the amount of ketchup that they're using. They're just plopping it on. And
Oil.
so it's at least 20% wrong. There's at least 20% more calories than what you think on the menu.
Yep.
It can be up to 245%
Yep.
higher. And that's what I'm saying. If you had a 500 calorie meal, it could be 1,200 calories.
Yep.
Easy. Now that includes an entire meal. So that includes the appetizer and the meal at a restaurant. That's not even including dessert. So it could be easily like 275% if we include dessert.
Yeah.
But people think like, hey, I'm just sticking to my macros, that's completely fine. But if you're not working on getting that variability down, and that's why I say plan out 2, 3 meal options for lunch and dinner. And this is where it will help you meal prep. Because if you have these planned out, you say, okay, well, based on the meals that I'm having, I'm gonna have either chicken breast or 93% ground beef or flank steak, and then you have those prepped and ready. You're not making every one of these meals. If you try to make every one of these meals a la carte, you're going to burn out. There's no way you're going to be
Yeah.
successful
Yeah.
unless you don't have a job. Like, if that's what you do, then that's fine. But unless you don't have a job, it's not going to be successful because the second that you get stressed or get emotional or something pops up in your life, now you're grabbing fast food. And that's not going to work out, not long term, not if this happens often. So be very conscious of these things. And so when we talk about macros is a learning tool. It's not a long-term solution for most people. Unless you're very neurotic and this is the way that you like to live. And I don't have a problem with people doing macros long term, but if you're also having anxiety about not tracking for whatever reason,
Exactly.
then
Exactly.
that's the issue. I know
Yeah.
people that have done macros for 10 years and I'm completely fine with them doing it because when they go on vacation, they don't feel the need to bring a scale and they're okay with it. That's a healthy relationship. And they just say, hey, it makes my life easier. And that's cool. But that's not who we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And to go along with the things, just to finish the thought of the 3 things that long-term weight loss maintainers do, they cook their own food, low variability in the foods that they have. They're typically low fat. Now, that last one is not a requirement, but out of all of the people in these large scale studies, it's like 75% are low fat, higher carb, not low carb, higher fat. And they're like that. They're probably like that. I don't think that there's anything inherently healthier or weight lossier about carbs. I think it's the fact that when they're higher carb compared to the fat, they're filling their day with more fruits and veggies, which
More
is
satiety. Yeah.
well, it's not
More
only
volume.
more satiety at once because they're higher volume, but that fiber slows digestion, which
Yep.
means it's less hunger long term.
Yep.
And so I think that that's why it ends up happening. And I'm the opposite. I actually like higher fat to higher carb. And 25% of people were fine doing that. But I also don't really give into like hunger signals that much. Um, I've got no problem just not eating if if there's not a thing there. So this is going to be different per person, but those are the 3 things that tend to be similar with people that actually lose the weight and keep it off. This isn't just losing the weight because losing weight, you can do that with like high variability because you can raw dog it and white knuckle it through those time periods, but you're going to burn out over time. And the people that really are successful kind of accept these things early on and work towards it. Even if you're going to be cooking more a la carte than what we're talking about here, they prep themselves as if they're not, so they have that option for when life gets busy and difficult. Okay. Is it safe to take or drink green tea as an appetite suppressant? Yeah, it certainly is safe to do that. It's not going to be super effective for most people. And I say that because, I mean, maybe if it was before I said that and it was placebo, but I say that because they looking at the EGCG and stuff like that that kind of aids fat loss a little bit and appetite suppression a little bit, the caffeine and it aids appetite suppression a little bit. If you're having caffeine from other sources, like if you have coffee or energy drinks or pre-workout or anything like that, even the EGCG doesn't seem to aid in fat loss. It just seems to just get lost in the noise if you take stimulants regularly, and even if you don't, the differences in calorie burn per day with proper amounts of EGCG that you may not even be getting from green tea that you may need to supplement with, it's like 30 calories per day of an increase in calorie burn. So it's not really anything you're going to notice. I have poor glute activation. I can't ever feel them and they can't engage. Do you have any tips? Beth, do you want to take that one?
Oh my God. You already know what I'm gonna say. So this is a huge pet peeve of mine that people think that they need to feel their glutes working when they're doing glute movements. So like barbell hip thrusts are a great example of this. And people think that if they can't really feel them and connect with them, that their glutes are weak or they're inactive. If you truly had inactive glutes, you would not be able to physically stand up off of the couch and walk. So your glutes are not inactive. There are some people, and I am one of these people, there are some glute exercises that you're just not going to connect well with from I feel that perspective. I am one of these people who barbell hip thrusts, glute bridges, it doesn't matter. I never feel them in my glutes ever. But that does not mean if I'm doing full hip extension, if you are fully extending your hips, your glutes have to be working. They have to be active. They are the primary mover of hip extension. That is the glutes. That is driven by the butt cheeks. So I would say don't micromanage this. I don't think that you actually have poor glute activation. If you can get into full hip extension, your glutes are fully active, and this is not something that you need to worry about. You may just not connect super well with a particular exercise like hip thrust or whatever it is where you're feeling this. I personally feel the most glute engagement and recruitment when I'm doing lunges. So there may be another exercise that you can use in your repertoire to work your glutes in a way that you really feel them and you really connect well with. I would encourage you to work that kind of exercise into your program. My leg days always involve some sort of hip extension, but they also involve some sort of lunge pattern for that exact reason.
Yeah, and if you suspect that you have inactive or an underactive musculature, you need to see a neurologist
Yeah, I mean, if
because
you
it's
if
possible you can, but if you have that, that means that there's neurological damage, or it means that you have like blood vessels occluded.
But I want to know what these people mean by I don't have I'm having trouble with glute activation. Like what makes you say that?
Usually
Not- Can you
it's a chiropractor that said that.
can you not stand up and walk around? Like if that is the case, then yeah, you don't have glute activation and you need to go to a doctor. But if
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
because you're doing a hip thrust and you don't feel it in your glutes, that doesn't mean you don't have glute activation.
right. I mean, and this is the thing that people think that, hey, some musculature, I get really sore and I get really, it really burns. And I love that feeling. And I want to feel that in every muscle that I work. I want people to understand that that soreness, that burn, that deep down feeling there's a lot of factors that affect that. Your genetics. Certain people get more sore in certain muscles than others. How hydrated you are at the time, whether or not there's an eccentric action to the movement. The more eccentric of an action to the movement that there is, the more likely that you're going to feel it and get that burn and get that feeling that everybody is like, oh, this is really working extremely well. And so people underestimate the fact that maybe that's just not a muscle that they super feel based off of the type of movement that they're doing, but you cannot perform a lot of movements without that happening. It's like doing an RDL, like a Romanian deadlift or Romanian deadlift works the glutes a little bit better than a straight leg. But like let's say the Romanian deadlift, you say, okay, well, I don't feel my glutes. You wouldn't be able to complete a Romanian deadlift if your glutes were not
Exactly. Exactly.
firing very hard.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so you're either not lifting anything, and then you might have like if you're not lifting anything, from that, oh, I can't even get the bar off the ground. Well, maybe your glutes aren't firing. But again, you need to see a doctor then because that
Yeah.
means that there's a nerve transduction issue. It's not sending the signals to actually fire those glutes.
Yeah. But it
But
doesn't mean you need to do like clamshells and like monster walks.
no,
You
that
don't
won't
need
make a difference because they're not going to fire no matter what you
No,
do.
you don't need to pre-fatigue the muscle that you're about. That's the other thing that bothers me about this is usually people that are told this are then prescribed stuff like clamshells and, banded hip thrusts and monster walks before they do something like hip thrusts or RDLs. And so what they're doing is they're pre-fatiguing the primary mover of that exercise, which means you're not going to be able to load it up as heavy as you need to be to give it an adequate stimulus during the course of your workout. That's the other problem that I have with this is like you're sort of making the problem worse by prescribing all of this glute activation stuff prior to people's leg days.
Yeah, and I mean the same type of thing is one of the reasons that we see people do these ultra high volume programs because they want to be
Yeah.
able to feel that
Yeah.
sense in the muscle, even though it's not necessarily as for many people it's not as effective. For many people it's just wasted time, but they feel it, and therefore that's motivating to them.
Right.
And so again, I mean, I think that the moral of the story is if you're able to complete a movement that works something as a primary mover, you're using that
You're using the
because
muscle.
yeah,
The
because
muscle's active.
if you weren't doing that, like it's like saying I'm doing a bench press, but my chest isn't working. Like you wouldn't be able to press it up if it wasn't. And so if you truly believe that you have this issue, you need to see a neurologist, ask for a referral. What they will do, and I actually had this when I injured my spine. I was getting bad numbness down my entire arm. I lost 75%, maybe 80. I can't remember. It's one of the two. I lost like 75% of the function of my right arm from a strength perspective. And so they did a test where I actually probably lost more because what they were doing, this was my right arm and I'm right-handed. So what they were doing was they had me do a grip test with my left, and then they had me do a grip test with my right, and my right had a 75 or 80% discrepancy from my left. My left was that much stronger. And so my right was probably stronger than that prior to that since it was my strong hand. But
It's your strong hand.
yeah, no. But this was when I had a double spinal herniation with severe stenosis, and so the signal was cut off, and so I was having neurological disorders. That's the muscle not firing,
Right.
and so
And you know that. Like you
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 will
know
know when
like
your
you,
muscle
because
isn't
I
firing.
remember you were out in the garage and you couldn't do a pull-up. Like you could
Mm.
not do a single pull-up because you couldn't maintain that, like you couldn't get that muscle to
It wouldn't
physically
work.
work. I remember that clear as day.
Yeah, it wouldn't
Like
work.
that is a muscle that is inactive due to nerve damage.
Yeah, and so when people say that they have an inactive or an underactive muscle, no, you don't. You'll know. You'll know when you have an underactive or inactive muscle. You'll really know. It's very, very distinct. It's very obvious. And it's not just obvious in, oh, well, in squat, I don't feel it. It's like it's obvious all the time. Like anytime you try to use that muscle, you see it.
Yep.
Um, and so having gone through that, I'm like, holy shit, this is what it feels like. This is awful. And so it could be, like I said, it could be neurological. It could be a damage to the nerve. Maybe the nerve is pinched off. Maybe there's an issue in one of the plexi, or it could be blood vessel occlusion because blood vessel occlusion will do that too. And so what you need is you need to see a neurologist. They will put needles in the muscle along the track of the nerve that they think is damaged, and they will have you contract. Like, for instance, with me, it was all up and down my arm, and they had me contract. And what they're doing is they're trying to identify if the loss of signal is at the nerve or if it's at a blood vessel. Because if the EMG comes back correct and looking normal, then it starts to point towards, okay, well, maybe we have an occluded blood vessel. But if you think that you have something like that, yes, get checked because clamshells are not going to fix this. You've got something really bad going on, and you need to identify what is really bad. I mean, do you have like a tumor pressing against the nerve? Do you have like internal bleeding? Like what is happening to cause this? Because it's there's compression of some kind, or damage of some kind, and this needs to be addressed. But this is not what people are talking about when they're like, "Oh, I've got underactive glutes." It's like,
I have
no,
weak,
you're
sleepy glutes.
yeah, it doesn't happen. So that's a good place to end it. Thank you so much for spending some more time with us. Another Maui Athletics podcast knocked out. We will see you next week. And please let us know if you have any questions. Send them to us in DM, post up in our Mighty Networks community, send me a message on Instagram, or post up in our Facebook group, and we will get to them as we get time. Thanks, guys.